The crisis between Russia and NATO countries over Ukraine still carries a great deal of ambiguity about Moscow's intentions and possible reactions, in the event of a military incursion into Ukraine, as Washington warns. Russian President Vladimir Putin regularly reviews his skills in judo and other martial arts. Dr. Richard Haass, a thinker, diplomat, and writer, said in a report published by the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations. Success in these sports often depends on what the Japanese call kojishi, which is the imbalance of the opponent, through the use of techniques designed to disrupt his physical and mental balance. Haass adds that Putin sought to upset the balance of the United States and its NATO allies by mobilizing more than 100,000 Russian soldiers on the Ukrainian border. Having made no secret of his view that Russia and Ukraine are intrinsically linked, Putin may see re-establishing such a relationship as a way to solidify his legacy by erasing the perceived stigma that Russia suffered in the decades that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. Perhaps Putin believed that the threat to Ukraine would destabilize the country and provide an opportunity to replace the current pro-Western government with one more respectful of the Kremlin. Even more likely, Putin considered that mobilizing his forces would intimidate the United States and its relatively new president, Joe Biden, into accepting Ukraine's return to Russia's sphere of influence. After all, the United States had just carried out a chaotic and almost unconditional withdrawal from Afghanistan. Putin largely got away with the 2014 annexation of Crimea, and Chinese President Xi Jinping paid little price for the rollback of democracy in Hong Kong. So, from afar, the United States looked weak, divided, and inward-looking. Add to that Putin's disrespect for the United States' European allies, Haass said. Having unwisely decided to phase out nuclear power, Germany has allowed itself to become more dependent on Russian gas, and, as was often the case for West Germany during the Cold War, is uneasy about confronting the Kremlin. Moreover, Putin has begun his military buildup as winter approaches, when cooler temperatures and higher fuel prices would give the Kremlin additional leverage. The French focused on their upcoming presidential elections, while the United Kingdom was preoccupied with COVID-19, Britain's exit from the European Union, Brexit, and the actions of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. In addition, Putin has taken steps to reduce Russia's vulnerabilities, especially with regard to economic sanctions. The country's foreign exchange reserves reached a record $630 billion in December 2021, while high oil prices generated significant government revenues. China, which already provides diplomatic support, can provide financial assistance if needed to the Kremlin. But while Putin has been faking the Ukraine crisis, believing that he has a clear advantage against the West, he has made a mistake that could be dangerous even for a skilled martial arts practitioner. He underestimated his opponent, according to Haas. While Biden and NATO have said they will not intervene directly on Ukraine's behalf, this is not the same as accepting Russian hegemony. Indeed, the United States orchestrated a comprehensive response, sending weapons to Ukraine to increase the costs to Russia of any invasion and occupation. There are plans to fortify the NATO member states closest to Russia. Significant economic sanctions are being prepared. Redirecting gas to Europe would partially offset the potential loss of Russian supplies. All this means, Haas says, that Putin's initial approach failed to score a decisive blow. Putin has put himself in the unenviable position of either stepping up or finding a face-saving way to back down. The United States has wisely provided Putin with a diplomatic slope. This could entail the creation of a new structure to help support European security, as well as arms control arrangements that would limit the scope and location of a range of systems. The revitalized and revised Minsk process would seek a political settlement in eastern Ukraine that would allow greater autonomy for the region's population, many of whom are of Russian origin, and replace international peacekeepers with Russian soldiers. It is uncertain whether such an outcome would be sufficient for Putin. He will not hear what he wants, that Ukraine will never be able to join NATO, or that the alliance will withdraw to what it was more than 2 decades ago, before the alliance expanded into Central and Eastern Europe. But Putin will likely have a few weeks to think about his next steps. Putin has no other choice. He could increase Russia's military presence in the Western Hemisphere, claiming to be doing to the United States what it and NATO have done to Russia. But that would be risky, and it would do nothing to address his concerns in Europe. It is impossible to predict what Putin will do, and he may not have made up his mind yet. He may opt for a so-called minor incursion, or limited intervention, possibly to increase Russia's military presence in eastern Ukraine. Such a course would give Putin something to show for his aggressive diplomacy, without incurring major sanctions, as NATO's 30 members are unlikely to reach a consensus on how to respond. It would also be consistent with the martial arts approach to seeking tactical overtures to upset the opponent's balance. Haas concludes that such a scenario highlights the limits of martial arts, which are more about tactics than strategy. He says this largely made-up crisis in Ukraine risks leaving Russia in the worse position of seizing slightly more territory, but facing new sanctions, a stronger NATO,